I walked out of that restaurant 3 nights ago, and I haven't been back to our apartment since. My phone has 247 missed calls, and I'm not answering a single one. But let me back up because you need the full picture of why I'm done. Terry and I have been married for 4 years. We met when I was finishing my degree and working 2 jobs to pay my way through school without loans. She was working retail at the time. Seemed down to earth, liked that I was ambitious and working hard. Her family, though, they never thought I was good enough. Her sister Neve made comments from day one about how Terry could do better, how I didn't have the right background, didn't come from money like their other friends' husbands. Terry always told me to ignore it, said she didn't care what they thought. Turns out she cared a lot more than she let on. I've been climbing in my career the past few years. I'm not rich, but I'm doing fine. We live in a decent place, bills are paid, we take a vacation once a year. But it's never been enough for her. The past 2 years especially, she started making these comparisons. Her friend Barbara's husband drives a luxury car and wears expensive watches. Another friend's husband bought a boat. Terry started making comments about how we should have nicer things. Why wasn't I making more money? When was I going to get a real promotion? I bought her a bracelet for her birthday. Not some cheap thing either. I saved up and got her something I thought she'd actually like. Something delicate with small stones that matched her style. I was proud of it. Planned this whole dinner at this place she'd been wanting to try for months. Here's where it gets good. We're at the restaurant Thursday night. Her sister Neve is there, her best friend Peggy, Barbara, who she's always comparing me to, and 2 other women from her work. I excused myself to use the restroom, and when I came back, I stopped outside the women's bathroom because I heard Terry's voice. The door was slightly open, and I could hear everything. Terry was saying how exhausted she was from pretending I was enough for her. How she looks at Barbara's husband with his success and nice things and wonders what her life would be like if she'd made better choices. Nevaeh laughed and said, "Girl, you married down and we all knew it from the start." Someone else chimed in asking why she stayed with me. Terry said something about how she kept hoping I'd step up and become someone worth staying with. I stood there listening to my wife tell her friends that our entire marriage was her waiting for me to turn into someone else. Peggy said something about filming the gift opening because apparently they'd all decided beforehand that whatever I got Terry was going to be disappointing. They were planning to humiliate me. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. I walked back to the table and sat down, acted like everything was normal, ordered another drink, made small talk. The whole time I'm sitting there knowing exactly what they all think of me, knowing they've been mocking me behind my back probably for years. Time came for her to open my gift. I handed her the small wrapped box and she made this show of being excited, but now I could see it was fake. She unwrapped it, opened the box, looked at the bracelet. Her face changed. Not happy surprise. Disappointment. She held it up and said, "Oh look, another gas station special. This is what I get for marrying a loser who thinks potential pays bills." The whole table went quiet for exactly 2 seconds before they all started laughing. Nevaeh said something about it being what Terry deserved for her choices. Peggy had her phone out recording. Barbara made a comment about how her husband would never. One of the work friends suggested Terry sell it to help with grocery money since apparently I can't provide properly. Terry held that bracelet up like it was garbage and said, $20 of pure disappointment, just like our marriage. They all erupted. The table was loving it, making jokes about my career, about how I dress, about our apartment. Peggy was still filming, narrating like she was doing a documentary on what happens when women settle. I smiled, set down my drink, leaned over to Terry and said happy birthday really quietly. Then I stood up, grabbed my jacket and walked straight out of that restaurant. Didn't run, didn't make a scene, just left. I heard Terry call after me, but I kept walking. Got in my car and drove. Here's what Terry doesn't know, what none of them know. Our apartment? It's in my name only. I'm the only one on the lease. I signed it before we got married and never added her when we renewed. She has no legal claim to it. The car she drives? Registered to me. I make all the payments. Our bank accounts? We have a joint account we both use, but my actual savings, the account with the real money, that's separate. Always has been. She doesn't even know it exists. I'm not stupid. I grew up poor and I learned to protect myself. When we got married, I kept certain things separate just in case. Turns out just in case is right now. I went to my buddy Asher's place Thursday night, crashed on his couch. Friday morning, I called our apartment complex and told them I was going through a separation and needed the locks changed for security reasons. Paid the fee. Had it done that afternoon while Terry was at work. Then I went to the apartment while she was out, packed up all my important documents, my laptop, clothes, anything I actually cared about. Left all the furniture because, who cares? Took my name off the utilities and transferred them to her name, effective immediately. Friday evening, she came home to find new locks and her key didn't work, based on the texts I'm ignoring. She figured out pretty quickly what happened. The text started frantic. Where was I? What was I doing? Why were the locks changed? This was crazy. I was overreacting. It was just a joke at dinner. She didn't mean any of it. Then Navai started texting me, calling me insane, saying I was punishing Terry for being honest about her feelings, that I should be man enough to handle criticism. Saturday morning, I got a call from Terry's mother. Didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying I was being childish and cruel, that Terry was devastated, that I needed to come home and work this out like an adult. Work it out? They filmed my humiliation for entertainment. They planned it. I'm at Asher's place and I'm not going back. Terry has until the end of the month to figure out new living arrangements because I'm not renewing our lease and I'm not paying for an apartment she's in alone. She has a job. She can figure it out. My phone won't stop. Texts from her friends saying I'm taking this too far. Texts from Neva calling me every name you can imagine. Voicemails from Terry crying, then angry, then crying again. Her mom called 6 more times yesterday. Barbara apparently told someone who told someone else, and now people from Terry's work are getting involved, sending me messages on social media about how I'm making Terry look bad by abandoning her. I'm not answering any of them. Asher thinks I should at least talk to Terry once to lay out what happens next. Says I can't avoid her forever. But why should I give her anything? She made it clear what she thinks of me. Her whole circle made it clear. They wanted me to know I wasn't good enough, that I was an embarrassment. So now they can deal with the consequences of me actually leaving. The texts keep coming. This morning, Peggy sent me a long message about how I ruined Terry's birthday and made everything awkward. Navai sent another one saying their family always knew I was selfish and this proves it. What's wild is not one of them has apologized. Not one. They're all acting like I'm the problem for walking out instead of them being the problem for publicly destroying me at what was supposed to be a nice dinner. I haven't told Terry about the bank accounts yet. Haven't told her about the car registration. Haven't explained exactly how much I've been protecting myself all these years while she thought she had me figured out. She thinks I'm just angry, and I'll come back once I cool down. She has no idea what's actually coming. Update 1. It's been 5 days since I walked out and things have gotten so much messier. For everyone asking in the comments whether I'd actually go through with everything. Yeah, I'm going through with it. But Terry and her family are not going down without a fight, and honestly, the audacity of these people is something else. Monday morning, I went back to work. I figured I'd have at least a few hours of peace to focus on actual job responsibilities and not deal with the circus my marriage had become. Wrong. Around 11 a.m., I got a call from the front desk saying my wife was in the lobby demanding to see me. I told them I wasn't available and to ask her to leave. 10 minutes later, my supervisor came to my desk looking uncomfortable and said there was a situation in the lobby I needed to handle because it was getting disruptive. I went down and Terry was there with Navai, both of them looking like they'd barely slept. Terry's eyes were red and puffy. Navai looked ready to murder me. The second I walked into the lobby, Terry started in on how I'd abandoned her, how she couldn't get into the apartment, how I'd turned off her access to everything without warning. She said she'd been staying with Navai since Friday, and it was humiliating. I just stood there and let her talk because what was I supposed to say? Everything she was describing was exactly what I'd done on purpose. Navai jumped in saying I was being vindictive and cruel over a misunderstanding. Called me controlling for changing the locks. Said Terry had every right to access her own home and her own things. I finally spoke up and told them it's not her home. It's my apartment, my name on the lease. And she has no legal right to be there. Terry's face went white. She actually didn't know that detail. We'd been living there for 3 years and she never questioned whose name was on the paperwork. Then she switched tactics, started saying how much she loved me, how the things she said at dinner were just her venting frustration, how everyone complains about their spouse sometimes and I was taking it too seriously. She reached for my hand and I stepped back, told her that venting frustration is complaining to one friend in private. What she did was plan with multiple people to publicly humiliate me on camera for entertainment. Those aren't the same thing. Nevaeh said I was being dramatic, that it was just jokes between friends and I needed to learn to take criticism like an adult. I looked at her and said if it was just jokes, then why was Peggy filming it? Why did they discuss beforehand how disappointing my gift would be? Navai didn't have an answer for that. She just said I was twisting everything to make myself the victim. The lobby receptionist kept glancing over nervously and I realized we were making a scene in my workplace. I told Terry she needed to leave and we could talk later. She refused. Said she wasn't leaving until I gave her a key to the apartment and access to her things. I told her I'd arrange a time for her to get her belongings with advance notice, but she wasn't getting a key. She started crying harder. Asked how I could be so cold after 4 years of marriage. That's when their mother showed up. I don't know if they called her or if she was waiting outside, but suddenly Terry's mom was walking through the front door, and this is where everything got so much worse. Her mom started yelling at me right there in the lobby about how I was destroying her daughter over nothing, how Terry was having panic attacks because of me, how I was acting like a child who couldn't handle the truth. She got right in my face and said Terry had been too good for me from the beginning, and she'd told her daughter as much, but Terry married me anyway because she saw potential. And this is how I repay her patience? By throwing her out on the street? I stayed calm, told her Terry wasn't thrown out, she chose to leave, and she has until the end of the month to make other arrangements because I'm not renewing the lease. Her mom looked confused, asked what I meant about not renewing. I explained that since the lease is in my name only, I'm choosing not to renew it when it ends in 3 weeks. The apartment will no longer be available to either of us after that. You should have seen their faces. All 3 of them standing there realizing that Terry didn't just lose access to the apartment temporarily, she was going to lose it completely. And since I'm the only one on the lease, the landlord would only deal with me about any of it. Nevaeh started saying I couldn't do that it was illegal. I pulled out my phone and showed her the lease document I'd photographed. My name. Just mine. Perfectly legal. Her mom demanded to know where Terry was supposed to live. I said that wasn't my problem anymore. Security got involved at that point because her mom was getting louder and other people in the building were staring. I left them arguing with the security guard and went back upstairs. Got called into my supervisor's office 20 minutes later. He asked if everything was okay and I gave him the short version. He was surprisingly understanding but said I needed to handle my personal life outside of work hours. Fair enough. The texts that followed were unhinged. Terry saying I was ruining her life over nothing. Her mom saying she was going to talk to a lawyer about tenant rights. Nevaeh calling me every variation of terrible she could think of. But here's what none of them were saying, sorry. Not one apology for the dinner. Not one acknowledgement that what they did was wrong. Tuesday. I finally responded to one of Terry's texts. Told her she could come get her personal belongings Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. She asked if we could talk when she came over. I said she could get her stuff, that's it. She asked if I'd at least explain why I was doing this. I sent her a screenshot of her own text from a month ago where she'd complained to Nevaeh about how embarrassing it was that I drove a regular sedan while Barbara's husband had a luxury vehicle. A text where she said she was tired of pretending she wasn't disappointed by how I'd turned out. She tried calling immediately. I didn't answer. She texted back saying I was taking things out of context, that she was just having a bad day when she sent that. I sent another screenshot from 2 months before that, her telling Peggy she wished she'd married someone with better career prospects. Then another from 3 months ago, her and Nevaeh discussing how I'd never be the kind of man who could give her the lifestyle she wanted. I had months of these. I'd been watching her talk about me like this for almost a year. Every complaint, every comparison to other husbands, every comment about how she'd settled. I'd seen all of it because I'd started checking her messages after she made one too many comments about other men's success in front of me. I never said anything, just watched and waited. She stopped responding to the screenshots. 30 minutes later, she called from Nevaeh's phone and I actually answered because I wanted to hear this. She was sobbing, saying those messages didn't mean anything, that everyone vents about their relationships sometimes, that she loved me and wanted to work things out. I asked her which part exactly was venting. The part where she called our marriage disappointing? The part where she said she regretted marrying me? Or the part where she and her friends planned to humiliate me for their entertainment? She said she never planned the restaurant thing, that her friends just got carried away in the moment. I laughed, told her I heard Peggy specifically say she was going to film the gift opening. Heard Nevaeh suggest making fun of whatever I got. Terry went quiet, then tried saying she tried to stop them but couldn't control what they said. I hung up. Wednesday evening she showed up to get her things, brought Nevaeh and Barbara with her. I'd already packed everything that was obviously hers into boxes and garbage bags. Clothes, toiletries, shoes, her books, decorations she'd bought, anything with her name on it. Left it all in the living room. She walked in and saw the boxes and immediately started crying again. Asked why I was doing this to her. I told her to take her stuff and leave. She tried a different approach. Started talking about our memories in the apartment. The first night we moved in, holidays we'd celebrated there. Asked if I really wanted to throw away 4 years over one bad night. I told her it wasn't one bad night. It was years of her looking down on me and finally saying it out loud. She'd just gotten comfortable enough to do it publicly. Barbara actually spoke up. Said Terry had been under a lot of stress and sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're stressed. I looked at Barbara and asked her if she thought her husband was more successful than me. She got uncomfortable. Said she didn't want to get involved. I said she was already involved since she'd been at the dinner laughing along with everyone else. She didn't have a response to that. Nevaeh loaded boxes into her car while Terry kept trying to convince me to reconsider. She asked about the car. I told her the car stays with me since it's registered in my name and I make the payments. She said she needed a car for work. I suggested she buy one. She said she didn't have money saved for that. I said that sounds like a personal problem. Then she asked about our bank account, the joint one we'd been using for bills and groceries. I told her I'd be withdrawing my portion and closing my access to the account. She could keep what was in there, about $800, but I wouldn't be adding more. She asked how she was supposed to pay rent wherever she moved. I said she has a job and she'd figure it out. That's when she completely broke down, started saying I was trying to destroy her, that I was leaving her with nothing. I corrected her. I wasn't leaving her with nothing. I was leaving her exactly the way she described me. Disappointing and not enough. She wanted to know what it felt like to marry someone who couldn't provide the lifestyle she wanted. Now she could experience being that person herself. They left with her stuff around 8 p.m. I changed the locks again that night just in case anyone had managed to copy a key earlier. Thursday, her dad called. I'd barely heard from him during our entire marriage, but suddenly he's calling to tell me I need to help his daughter because she's family. I asked where he'd been when his wife and other daughter were teaching Terry that I wasn't good enough. He said that wasn't fair, that families are complicated. I said so is marriage, and I was done complicating mine. He tried the whole speech about marriage being work and not giving up when things get hard. I told him Terry gave up every time she compared me to another man and found me lacking. He didn't have much to say after that. Now it's Friday. Terry's been texting from different numbers because I blocked her original one. She's staying with Nevaeh, but apparently that's not going well because Nevaeh has a small apartment and doesn't really want a permanent roommate. Her mom is pressuring her to help Terry find a place, but everywhere requires first month, last month, and deposit, which Terry doesn't have. She texted this morning asking if I'd consider letting her stay in the apartment until she found something, offered to pay the full rent herself if I'd just give her time. I asked her where she'd get money for rent when she just told me she didn't have savings. She said she'd figure it out. I said no. She called me cruel. I reminded her that $20 of pure disappointment was her description of my gift, and by extension, me. Why would someone so disappointing help her now? The lease ends in 2.5 weeks, and I've already started looking at new places. Smaller, cheaper, just for me. Terry's running out of time and options. Her family's running out of patience. And I'm running out of reasons to care about any of them. Next update probably won't be pretty, because Terry's getting desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. Update 2. It's been 12 days since I walked out of that restaurant and 1 week until the lease ends. Things have escalated in ways I didn't fully anticipate but honestly should have. Terry's gotten more aggressive with her tactics and her family is losing their minds. But the most interesting development is how our mutual friend group has been handling this whole situation. Let me start with what happened over the weekend because that's when everything really blew up. Saturday afternoon, I was at the grocery store picking up some stuff when I ran into Orlando and Declan, two guys Terry and I have been friends with as couples for years. They do game nights with us. We've gone to concerts together. Normal friend stuff. The second Orlando saw me, he made a beeline over and asked what the hell was going on because Terry had been messaging his wife Bennett nonstop for 2 days. Apparently, Terry had been calling and texting all our mutual friends with her version of events. According to her story, I'd abandoned her without warning over a minor disagreement. She was telling people I changed the locks while she was at work and threw all her belongings into the hallway, that I'd drained our bank account and left her with nothing, that I was being abusive and controlling, and she was terrified of what I might do next. Orlando said Bennett was really worried about Terry until she started asking specific questions, and Terry's story kept changing. First, it was a minor disagreement. Then it was that I got upset over a joke. Then it was that I'd been planning to leave her for months and use the birthday dinner as an excuse. Bennett asked Terry directly what the disagreement was about, and Terry said I was mad she'd been honest about wanting nicer things. Completely left out the part where she called me a loser in front of everyone while they filmed it. Declan jumped in and said his girlfriend had gotten similar messages from Nevaeh. Nevaeh was apparently telling people I was financially abusing Terry by taking away her access to the apartment and car, that I was trying to make her homeless out of spite, that their whole family was concerned for Terry's safety because I was acting unstable. I pulled out my phone right there in the grocery store and showed them the video, the one Peggy posted to her Instagram story that night. She'd deleted it after a few hours, but I'd screen recorded it before it disappeared. I'd been holding on to it specifically for moments like this. Both of them watched the whole thing. Terry holding up my gift and calling it gas station garbage, her saying I was a loser who thought potential paid bills, the entire table laughing, Peggy narrating about what happens when you settle, the $20 of pure disappointment comment, all of it. Orlando's face changed completely as he watched. When it finished, he just said, "This is what she's calling a minor disagreement?" Declan was shaking his head, asked if Terry knew I had this video. I told them she had no idea I'd saved it, that I'd been documenting her behavior for months, because I knew eventually she'd push things too far and I wanted proof. They both asked what I meant by months. So, I showed them some of the screenshots. Terry's messages to Nevi about being embarrassed by my career. Her text to Peggy about wishing she'd married someone wealthier. Her complaints to Barbara about how I'd never be the kind of husband who could give her a luxury lifestyle. Messages going back almost a year where she progressively got more critical and more open about her disappointment in me. Declan actually got angry, said he and his girlfriend had been considering letting Terry stay with them temporarily because Nevia's place was too small and Terry had nowhere to go. But if this is what she'd really been saying about me behind my back, then absolutely not. Orlando said the same thing. That Bennett had been organizing people to help Terry move and find a place, but she needed to see this video first. I sent them both copies. Told them to share it with whoever Terry had been messaging, that I was done with her painting me as the bad guy when she'd been planning my public humiliation for entertainment. Sunday morning, I woke up to furious messages from Terry. Someone had shown her that I was sharing the video. She was livid, called me every name she could think of, said I was ruining her friendships and turning people against her, that I was being vindictive and cruel by sharing something that was meant to be a private moment between friends. I responded for the first time in days, told her Peggy posted it publicly on Instagram. It stopped being private the second she published it to social media, and I was only showing people what she'd actually said and done since she'd been lying to everyone about what happened. She tried calling immediately. I didn't answer. She called from Nevi's phone. Didn't answer that either. Then her mom called. Then her dad. Then Nevi. I let them all go to voicemail. The voicemails were wild. Her mom saying I was destroying Terry's reputation by spreading lies. Her dad threatening to get lawyers involved for defamation. Nevi screaming that I was a vindictive, manipulative person who couldn't let go of one mistake. But here's the thing, I wasn't spreading lies. I was literally showing people exactly what happened using Terry's own friend's video. Monday at work was interesting. Remember how Terry showed up at my office before? Well, apparently she'd been telling people at my workplace her version of events too. She'd talked to someone she knew in a different department, and that person had been spreading around that I was going through a nasty separation where I was being unreasonable. Except that person saw the video because Bennett knows someone who knows someone, and now it's made its way through several social circles. Tuesday evening, Terry showed up at Asher's place. I don't know how she found out I was staying there, but she did. Asher answered the door, and she pushed right past him asking to talk to me. I came out of the guest room and she immediately started in about how I was ruining her life, how she'd lost friends, how her own family was starting to question her story, how she couldn't find anywhere to live because nobody would help her anymore. I asked her whose fault that was. She said mine for sharing that video. I told her it was hers for saying those things in the first place, for planning the whole humiliation with her friends, for spending a year talking about how disappointing I was to everyone who would listen. She switched to crying, said she never meant any of it, that she was just frustrated sometimes and vented to her friends the way everyone does, that the dinner got out of hand but it wasn't supposed to be like that. I asked her what it was supposed to be like then. She didn't have an answer. Just kept crying and saying she was sorry. I told her sorry wasn't enough, that she'd shown me exactly what she thought of me and I believed her. She asked what she was supposed to do, where she was supposed to go. The lease ended in 5 days and she had nowhere lined up. I said that wasn't my problem. Nevi burst in then. She'd been waiting in the car apparently, started yelling at me about how I was being heartless, how Terry was family, and I was treating her like garbage. I pointed out that Terry had literally called my gift garbage in front of everyone, so maybe she understood now how that felt. Nevi said I was being petty and holding a grudge over nothing. This is where I lost it a little. I asked Nevi when exactly she'd decided I wasn't good enough for her sister. Was it when we first met? Was it after the wedding? She looked caught off guard. I told her I'd heard her at the restaurant, heard her tell Terry that marrying me was marrying down, and they all knew it from the start. Asked her what made her think she had any right to judge me when she'd been working retail for 6 years with no career advancement while I'd been steadily moving up in my field. She got defensive. Said her job situation was different, that she had reasons for staying where she was. I said everyone has reasons, but that doesn't mean they get to look down on other people for not meeting their arbitrary standards of success. That maybe instead of judging her sister's husband, she should focus on her own life. Terry told me I was being mean. I told her I was being honest, something she clearly had trouble with since she'd spent our entire marriage pretending to be happy while telling everyone else how disappointing I was. She tried to argue that she had been happy. I pulled out my phone again and read her own messages back to her. Ones where she'd told Peggy she regretted marrying me, where she'd told Barbara she felt trapped, where she'd told Nevi she was waiting for me to finally become someone worth staying with. She stood there crying while I read her own words to her. Navaya tried to defend her, saying that everyone has doubts sometimes. I said doubts are normal, but planning to publicly humiliate your spouse for entertainment crosses a line. Asher had been standing in the kitchen doorway watching all this. He finally spoke up and told them they needed to leave, that this was his place and they weren't welcome. Navai started arguing with him, but Terry grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Before leaving, Terry turned around and said she'd been trying to get me to understand, but I wasn't listening. That she'd made mistakes, but I was making everything worse by being so cold about it. I told her I'd learned from the best since she'd been cold about our marriage for at least a year while pretending otherwise. They left. Asher locked the door behind them and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He said I didn't look fine. I told him I'd been preparing for this for months and I meant it. That every conversation, every confrontation, everything I was doing was exactly what I'd planned once I realized what Terry really thought of me. Wednesday, I got a text from Barbara. She asked if we could talk. I ignored it. She texted again, saying she understood why I was angry, but that Terry was really struggling and maybe I could consider helping her find a place to stay. I responded asking why Barbara thought I should help someone who'd spent a year, telling her how much she regretted marrying me. Barbara said relationships are complicated, and sometimes people say things they don't mean. I sent Barbara the same screenshots I'd shown Orlando and Declan. All of Terry's messages about wanting to be with someone more successful, about being embarrassed by my career and lifestyle, about feeling like she'd settled. Barbara stopped responding after that. Thursday, Terry's dad called again. This time I answered. He tried the whole disappointed father routine, saying I was being unnecessarily harsh with his daughter, that she'd made mistakes, but I was destroying her by refusing to help. I asked him point blank, did he know his wife and daughter Navai had been telling Terry for years that she married beneath her? He got quiet. I asked if he knew they'd been encouraging her to compare me to other men and find me lacking. He said that wasn't fair to bring up. I told him what wasn't fair was spending 4 years married to someone whose entire family thought I wasn't good enough while pretending they accepted me. That Terry didn't develop these attitudes in a vacuum. She learned them from watching her mom and sister treat me like I was temporary. Like eventually she'd wake up and leave me for someone better. He tried to argue that wasn't true, but I cut him off. Told him the lease ended in 3 days, and after that, Terry's living situation was completely her responsibility. He started to say something else, but I hung up. It's Thursday night now. The lease ends Sunday. Terry has been frantically applying to apartments all week, but she doesn't have the money for deposits, and her credit isn't great because she'd been relying on me to cover most expenses while she spent her money on clothes and going out. She texted earlier asking if I'd co-sign a lease with her so she could get approved somewhere. I said absolutely not. Her mom called tonight saying they might let Terry move in with them temporarily, but their place is small and it can't be permanent. Asked if I'd reconsider about the apartment. I told her the landlord already has noticed that I'm not renewing. It's done. She said Terry's going to end up living out of her car if she can't find something. I said Terry should have thought about that before publicly calling me a disappointment for entertainment. I have a new place lined up. Smaller apartment across town. Moving in Monday. Fresh start with nobody knowing my business. I've already started packing what little stuff I kept from the old place. Saturday is when I take the car back. Terry's been driving it thinking she still has access, but the registration and insurance are in my name, and I'm not paying for her to have a vehicle anymore. She's going to lose her transportation and her housing in the same weekend. And honestly, I don't feel bad about any of it. She wanted to know what disappointment felt like. Now she does. Final update. It's been 3 weeks since I walked out of that restaurant, and I'm writing this from my new apartment with zero regrets about anything that happened. The past few days have been absolute chaos for Terry and her family, and I'm going to walk you through all of it because some of you have been following this from the beginning and deserve to know how it ended. Saturday morning, I went to get the car back. I texted Terry Friday night that I needed the vehicle returned by 10 a.m. Saturday, and she could leave the keys in the mailbox at the old apartment. She responded asking how she was supposed to get around without a car. I told her the same way millions of people do. Public transportation, ride shares, figure it out. She said she had to work and needed the car. I reminded her the car was registered and insured under my name. I'd been making all the payments and I was taking it back. She asked for more time to save up for her own vehicle. I said no. Saturday at 9 a.m., she texted saying she couldn't get the car back by 10 because she was at Navaya's apartment across town. I told her that was her problem to solve. She said she'd bring it by noon. I said if the car wasn't in the parking lot with keys in the mailbox by 10 a.m., I was reporting it stolen. She started calling immediately. I didn't answer. She called from 3 different numbers. Didn't answer any of them. At 9:47 a.m., the car pulled into the apartment complex parking lot. Terry got out with Neva following in her own vehicle. I was already there waiting. Terry tried to hand me the keys directly and start a conversation, but I walked past her to the mailbox, stood there waiting until she dropped the keys inside, then got in the car and drove off. Heard her yelling after me, but I didn't stop. That car was the last thing tying Terry to any stability. No apartment, no vehicle, no money saved, because she'd been spending everything on maintaining an image of success she couldn't afford. Everything she'd built her life on was suddenly gone. Sunday was when the lease officially ended. I'd already moved my stuff out earlier in the week. Sunday morning, I did a final walkthrough with the landlord, handed over my keys, got my security deposit back. The landlord asked if my wife would be returning her keys, and I told him we were separated. She was no longer living there, and she had no legal claim to the apartment. He seemed uncomfortable, but accepted it. Around noon, Terry showed up at the apartment. I was still there finishing paperwork with the landlord. She had 2 suitcases and looked like she'd been crying for hours. She tried to go inside and the landlord stopped her, told her the lease had ended and she couldn't enter the property. She looked at me and asked where she was supposed to go. I said that wasn't my concern. She started crying harder, said she'd been applying to places all week but everywhere wanted deposits she didn't have and references she couldn't provide. The landlord excused himself, said he'd email me the final documentation and left quickly. He clearly didn't want to be part of whatever was happening. Terry tried to grab my arm, said she had nowhere to go, that her parents' place was too small for her to stay there long term, that Nevaeh's apartment only had 1 bedroom, and Nevaeh was already irritated having her on the couch, that she'd called every friend she had and nobody could take her in. I asked where Peggy was since they'd been such good friends at the restaurant. She said Peggy had stopped responding to her messages after the video got around. I told her she'd have to figure something out. She asked how I could be so cold, how I could just leave her with nothing after 4 years of marriage. I looked at her directly and said I'd been preparing for this exact moment for almost a year, that every decision I'd made, every account I'd kept separate, every document I'd kept in my name only, all of it, was specifically so when this day came I could walk away completely. Her face changed. She asked what I meant by preparing for a year. I told her I'd known for months that she was unhappy with me, that I'd seen her messages to her friends, that I'd watched her compare me to other men and find me lacking over and over, that I knew about the conversations with Nevaeh where they discussed how she'd married beneath her, that the restaurant wasn't some surprise. I'd been waiting for her to finally say out loud what she'd been saying behind my back. She tried to argue that she didn't mean those things, that she was just venting frustration. I cut her off and said she meant every word, and I'd spent months making sure that when she finally showed her true feelings publicly, I'd be in a position to leave without looking back. She asked why I stayed, if I knew she felt that way. I told her I stayed because I wanted to see exactly how far she'd go, how bad it would get before she couldn't hide it anymore. And watching her plan my public humiliation with her friends while I knew about it the whole time was almost entertaining. She looked genuinely shaken, said that was manipulative and cruel. I told her it was strategic and that she'd taught me well that marriage was really about who had more leverage. Nevaeh showed up then to pick Terry up. She got out of her car and immediately started yelling at me about how I was destroying her sister, how Terry was falling apart, how their whole family was worried about her mental health. I said Terry's mental health wasn't my responsibility anymore. Nevaeh called me heartless. I reminded her that she'd told Terry at the restaurant that marrying me was marrying down, that she'd spent years making sure Terry knew I wasn't good enough, told her congratulations. She'd succeeded in convincing her sister to treat me like I was disposable. Now she could deal with the consequences of that. Nevaeh said I was twisting everything, that families are honest with each other and sometimes that means hard truths. I asked if the hard truth was that their whole family had spent 4 years waiting for Terry to leave me for someone better and they were angry it hadn't happened yet. She didn't have an answer for that. Terry got in Nevaeh's car and they left. I finished up with the apartment and went back to Asher's place. Sunday night around 11 p.m., my phone started going crazy. Terry's mom calling, then her dad, then Nevaeh, then numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored all of them. The voicemails started piling up. Her mom screaming about how Terry was having a breakdown. Her dad saying I needed to answer my phone immediately. Nevaeh saying something about Terry not being able to breathe. I deleted the voicemails without listening to all of them. Monday morning, I moved into my new place. Smaller apartment in a different part of town. Nobody from Terry's circle knows where it is. I'd already set up all the utilities in my name. Changed my address with work, updated everything. Clean slate. Around 2 p.m., Terry's dad managed to get through on a number I didn't have blocked. He was furious. Said Terry had a complete panic attack Sunday night after leaving the apartment, that she'd been hyperventilating and couldn't calm down, that they'd almost taken her to the hospital, that she'd been up all night crying. He wanted to know how I could do this to someone I'd promised to love. I told him I'd promised to love the person I thought I married. Not the person who'd been performing for 4 years while telling everyone else how disappointing I was. He said marriage means working through problems, not abandoning people when things get difficult. I said Terry had been emotionally abandoning our marriage for at least a year by treating it like a placeholder until something better came along. He tried to argue, but I talked over him. Told him his wife and daughter Navai had spent years teaching Terry that I wasn't good enough, that they'd created a situation where Terry felt entitled to compare me to other men and judge me as lacking, that he'd stood by while his family treated me like I was temporary. He went quiet, then said even if that was true, I was taking things too far, that Terry had nowhere to go and no resources. I said she had a job and she'd figure it out the same way I'd figured everything out when I was working my way through college with no family money to fall back on. He started saying something about how that was different, but I hung up. Tuesday, Terry tried to come to my workplace again. Security called me before letting her up and I told them I didn't want to see her. They escorted her out. She waited in the parking lot for 3 hours until I left work, followed me to my car and tried to block me from getting in. Started talking about how she'd lost everything, how she was staying with her parents but they'd told her it could only be temporary, how she couldn't afford an apartment on her own, how she'd had to take ride shares to work which was eating through what little money she had, how she'd applied for car loans but gotten denied because her credit wasn't good enough. I asked her what she wanted me to do about it. She said she needed help, just some help getting back on her feet. Maybe I could co-sign a lease or loan her money for a deposit. I asked why she thought I would do any of that. She said because we'd been married for 4 years and that had to mean something. I told her it meant I'd spent 4 years being judged as not good enough while thinking we had a real partnership. That finding out the whole time she'd been waiting for me to become someone else was enough to erase any obligation I felt. She tried a different approach. Said she knew she'd messed up, that she'd said terrible things, that she'd let her family and friends influence her too much, that she wanted to work on things if I'd just give her a chance. I asked if she actually wanted to work on things or if she just wanted financial stability back. She couldn't answer that. Started crying instead. I got in my car. She was standing there crying in the parking lot as I drove away. Wednesday, her mom called again from yet another number. This time I answered because I wanted to end this. She started with how disappointed she was in me, how she'd raised her daughter to believe marriage was forever, and I was teaching Terry that promises meant nothing. I asked her if she'd raised Terry to believe that husbands were interchangeable and you should always be looking for an upgrade. She got defensive, said she'd never taught Terry that. I told her she'd spent 4 years making comments about how I wasn't successful enough, didn't make enough money, didn't provide the lifestyle Terry deserved, that she'd compared me to other husbands constantly, that she'd told Terry directly that I wasn't good enough. She tried to deny it. I reminded her of specific comments she'd made at family gatherings, times she'd mentioned other men's careers in front of me, conversations where she'd asked Terry if she was happy with how things were going financially in our marriage. She went quiet, then said she'd only wanted the best for her daughter. I told her she'd taught her daughter that her husband's worth was measured in money and status, that she'd created the situation where Terry felt entitled to publicly humiliate me because she'd learned that's how you treat people who don't meet your standards. She said I was exaggerating, that Terry loved me. I told her Terry loved the idea of who she thought I'd become, not who I actually was, that there's a difference and I was done pretending otherwise. She asked what Terry was supposed to do now. I said Terry was 29 years old with a job and she'd figure it out. She said Terry couldn't afford to live on her own. I said maybe Terry should have thought about that before calling my gift $20 of pure disappointment in front of everyone. She hung up on me. Thursday, I got a long text from Terry. She'd apparently been writing it all day. Said she understood now why I was angry, that she'd been wrong to say those things at the restaurant, that she'd been wrong to compare me to other men, that she'd let her insecurities about money and status poison our marriage, that she wanted to work on herself and prove she could be better, that she was asking for one more chance. I didn't respond. Friday afternoon, Peggy of all people tried to message me on social media. Said she wanted to apologize for her role in what happened at the restaurant, that she'd gotten caught up in the moment and hadn't thought about how hurtful it would be, that she felt terrible about filming it. I looked at her profile and saw she'd unfriended Terry completely, realized she was trying to cover herself now that the situation had blown up. I blocked her without responding. It's Friday night now. 3 weeks since I walked out of that restaurant. Terry is living with her parents in their small 2-bedroom house, and from what I understand, it's not going well. Her dad is frustrated having an adult daughter back home. Her mom is critical of everything Terry does. Navai is avoiding her because Terry keeps asking to stay at her place instead. Terry's been looking at rooms for rent in shared houses because that's all she can afford. She's taking the bus to work, which means leaving an hour early and getting home an hour late. She's been trying to save money for a used car but can't get approved for any loans and doesn't have enough for a cash purchase. Her friend group has basically dissolved. Orlando and Declan's partners want nothing to do with her after seeing the video. Barbara has distanced herself. Peggy is pretending they were never that close. The women from her work are staying out of it. And me? I'm in my new apartment with my own space and my own peace. I spent 4 years being someone's disappointment. 4 years being compared to other men and found lacking. 4 years with a woman who was waiting for me to become someone I never agreed to be. I'm done with all of it. Some people have messaged me saying I went too far, that leaving Terry without resources was cruel, that I should have at least helped her transition to independence. But here's what they don't understand. I gave Terry 4 years of my life while she was quietly deciding I wasn't good enough. I worked hard, paid the bills, tried to build a life together while she was planning her escape strategy and comparing me to men with more money. She wanted to know what it felt like to marry someone disappointing. Now she knows what it feels like to lose someone who is holding everything together. I saw her one last time yesterday. I was leaving the gym and she was waiting near my car. Don't know how she found out where I work out, but she was there. She looked exhausted. Said she'd been hoping to run into me because I wouldn't return her messages. Asked if we could talk somewhere. I told her we had nothing to talk about. She said she'd been thinking about everything that happened and she finally understood what she'd done wrong. That she'd taken me for granted and treated me like I was replaceable. I told her she'd understood that the whole time. That the problem wasn't her not knowing she was treating me badly. The problem was she did it anyway because she thought I'd always be there. That she could have her safety net while openly wishing for something better. She tried to argue, but I cut her off. Told her I'd spent almost a year watching her tear me down in private while playing loving wife in public. That I'd seen every message where she'd compared me to other men. That I'd heard every conversation where she and her family discussed how I wasn't good enough. She asked why I didn't say something if I knew. I told her because I wanted to see if she'd stop on her own. If she'd realize what she was doing and choose to appreciate what we had. But she didn't. She just kept going until she felt comfortable enough to humiliate me publicly. She said she was sorry. That she'd do anything to fix this. I told her there was nothing to fix because I didn't want to be married to someone who spent years wishing I was someone else. She asked what she was supposed to do. I said figure it out the same way I'd been figuring out my life since before we met. She started crying. I walked past her and left. That's it? That's where this ends. No reconciliation. No second chances. No helping her get back on her feet. She made her choices and I made mine. I chose to protect myself years ago when I first started seeing signs that Terry wasn't happy. I chose to keep certain things in my name only. I chose to save separately. I chose to be ready for the moment when her true feelings came out. And when that moment came at her birthday dinner, I walked out knowing exactly what I was going to do next. People keep asking if I feel bad. The answer is no. I feel free. Free from constantly being measured against other men. Free from trying to earn approval from people who'd decided from the beginning I wasn't good enough. Free from performing in a marriage where my wife was waiting for me to transform into someone else. Terry wanted $20 of pure disappointment. She got a whole lifetime of it.